Hello, Kyrie Edwards here, running for Congress in Maryland's 4th District. This is going to be a long video on affordability, one of my three policy points. If you want to see a video on stabilization, you can go and see the previous video on this channel. If you want to see smaller versions of that, you can go and see on my TikTok. I believe it's Kyrie for Congress MD4, and I plan to add some of those here too. So affordability, you've heard it a lot, mostly because Zoran Mamdani won spectacularly in New York City as a Democratic Socialist, which we need way more of. I think we need Democratic Socialists, Socialists, and Greens, Working Families Party members to run all over the nation, for Congress, for Senate, for mayors, for state reps, school board, all the things. And I think people like myself running for a Democratic Party, willing to adopt the platform and ideals, um, many of which I believe myself, is also the way to go. Since unfortunately we still have a two-party system, and we still need some people running in the Democratic Party to push the party to the left. Um, I think, um, and again, you can go to my website at kyrieedwardsforcongress.com, look at the policy page, and go to affordability, and it has most of the things that I'm going to say on here. There's about 17 policies. It's not an exhaustive list. There are plenty of other things we can do to make things more affordable. There are some things like, for example, I didn't put a whole lot on here about subsidizing the cost of utility bills. Um, I talked a little bit about in the stabilization section. I do think data centers should subsidize the cost of electricity and water usage in their neighborhoods. But yeah, just to say that this is not an exhaustive list. If you have ideas, definitely reach out and let me know. So the biggest mistake of the Biden administration, and there are a lot of them, he didn't drop out and let Kamala run, earlier. Um, he didn't do a great job on COVID. He just did a lot better than Trump. He didn't fight for some common sense things, a lot of which I'm going to be mentioning in this video, like $15 minimum wage. He abandoned all of the, really progressive economic policies that he ran on very quickly, mostly because Joe Manchin didn't like them. Joe Manchin said no, and so Joe Biden was like, all right. But the biggest mistake is he didn't do a lot on housing. He was in the Obama administration, obviously, as the vice president, and he saw that there was a housing crisis. And at the time, the Obama administration couldn't do very much other than um, try to bail out banks, which was unpopular but possibly necessary. Um, could have taken over those banks, that would have been better, but opted not to. And to try to stabilize interest rates for people that wanted to buy a home, and also to try to keep those property rates high for people whose retirement plan was selling their house. We saw that all of those things were unstable, and personally, I feel like it was a miss back in 2008 to radically change how our housing market worked, and we shouldn't have our housing market be treated like a commodity since housing is a need. But whatever, there was a lot of stuff going on. There was a crisis going on, and so we kind of gave the Obama Biden um, administration a pass. Hoped that they would do something in 2012 on the issue. Really didn't, unfortunately. That was a miss for them too. We did not expect Trump to do much in 2016, and he still let us down by making it worse. um, Removed some protections and such. Um, Stopped investigating discrimination cases, housing discrimination cases, for example. And then COVID hit, and people saw just how weak the job market was, saw just how weak our social safety net was, and saw how weak our housing market was. And we had a lot of people, and some of these people were people who had never missed a missed a rent payment before COVID. Had never been hungry in their life, had never had any financial issues. Some of these were doctors, nurses, and the such. But everything was shut down, and people didn't get income. Some of them for 3 to 6 months, depending what state you're in, and depending on if you work in healthcare or if you're in education. Some people just got screwed, and so there had to be a federal plan to help people, the very least, not be thrown on the streets. And so there was some relief to landlords. There was an eviction moratorium banning most landlords from kicking people out. But since housing courts were closed all over the country or virtual, and some people didn't have access to stable internet, um, and some landlords just didn't show up. And from personal experience, I know that sometimes if the landlords don't show up, the judges just don't feel comfortable hearing the case. If it's an eviction case, they probably would just, give you another month or toss the case. If it's something else, like you have an issue with the landlords, they tell you to sue the landlord and try to get your money back. And, good luck with that. Biden had a unique opportunity to harness all the rage built up over the last decade and also all the policy uh, wins and knowledge and research over the last decade and his institutional knowledge of the Senate and such that he ran on and claimed that would be an asset to get things passed. Spoiler alert, it did not. It was not. Um, to give us a housing bill of rights, and he did not, even though there were plenty of advisors that gave him ideas on what to do. Anything housing related quickly got stripped out of Build Back Better or the American Infrastructure Bill. I don't think that's actually what it was called. The Inflation Reduction Act is actually what it was called. But whatever. This video isn't just to bash Biden. He was not one of our better presidents, I will say, even if he did push some phenomenal policy. But all of it was in his first 6 to 8 months of office, and we were promised that we were going to get more, including housing, and we never did. So we still have the housing crisis that's been building for 20 years, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. Donald Trump at least is giving lip service to it, but his fix is instead of a 30-year mortgage, you have a 50-year mortgage. So I guess your plan is just to die without paying it off, and then the bank gets it back, gets the house back, and gets to double the price of the house and put it back on the market. I guess is the plan. Um, I have a better plan. We could stabilize the cost of rent so that people have some predictability and can reasonably plan out, the next 2, 3 years if they stay in a place. This is how much they're going to pay for rent. Rather than our plan now, where you just get closer and closer and closer to the end of your lease and you're waiting for a letter or a call or them to answer your email to tell you, hey, can I rent again? I haven't had any problems. You haven't had any problems. We should be good, right? And then you get something 2 weeks before being like, actually, we're thinking about, selling this place, or we don't wish to rent to you again. And then you're scrambling. You end up in a place that might not be a perfect fit for you. Maybe it's not big enough. Maybe it's not pet friendly and you have a dog. You have to pay $200 a month for pet fees. Maybe this place is almost perfect, but you're technically not allowed to be there because it's age restricted. You just don't have that many options, and sometimes when you don't have that many options, you have to pay more money. So I think one thing we can do is stabilize the cost of rent, and I have a few ideas of what we can do there. We can make sure that rent doesn't increase more than 2% a year um, for the unit, not just the tenant. So even if that tenant moves out, we don't have the unit like doubling in price between tenants. I think it can't increase more than $50 more than the previous tenant paid. So if you were paying $2,000 over the last 3 years, you move out, somebody moves in, they can charge them $2,050. That's fair. The market's not real. I just want to say that, make that clear. I know we have all these models and fancy, um, double talk and stuff that people, that's their whole career to get on TV and talk about how, oh, this is a really good market. I'd buy. Well, they're getting paid to say that, and they benefit from that. And the rich people who know when to buy have already bought the markets by the time, or they did buy the markets, but Freudians up there have already bought the houses by the time you get this information. Um, it's just not, the market doesn't exist. It's all made up. A house costs what you want it to cost. Like you have the construction cost, and you have the cost of actually repairs and stuff like that. Um, but that's not what they base it on. They base it off. They look around, they see what everyone else on the street is paying, and then they're like, "We're going to pay in that range," and that's just dumb. We don't have to do that. So we set a rent maximum as well. I think what we should do is have broad federal guidelines of and have definitions of what counts as, just your everyday, basic, affordable house, something in the middle, and then luxury homes. And we say, for example, luxury homes, we say what has to be included there. Personally, I think if it's luxury, it has to have something like fancy. I don't know, a hot tub in the pool or something. Um, Luxury has to be something more than just like carpets and new paint. It has to be bigger. It has to have covered garage. It has to have, I don't know, something. I don't have anything um, fully fleshed out in my brain. I just think that there needs to be three categories, and so you can't just upcharge somebody by changing the building to say Hudson Hill luxury apartments. It has to have actually had some changes to the interior and services provided. And then if it's like your everyday house where it's just like it has four rooms or whatever, and you have like some working toilets and parking lot where you can park without worries, and it's charging the lowest in the area, and yeah, you have what you want. This is what you paid for. Um, then yeah, they say that, and somewhere in between where maybe they have some of the amenities, some of the fancy stuff that a luxury apartment has, but maybe not the others. Um, then that makes sense. But right now, there's not really federal guidelines around that. You might notice a trend if you watch all of these that I think we just need better definitions and better federal definitions, um, just writ large, and this is one of them. I think you shouldn't just be able to throw marketing terms around and charge people more for them. So there's that. I also think landlords have to give a minimum of 120 days written notice to move when they know in which they're written to you. So that would take away the anxiety of waiting for them to get back to you and tell you if a if they're renting to you again next year. B, if the terms are changing in the lease, they should tell you before you get the piece of paper, or my last few have been electronic. I had the original that's in paper, and we sign and look over. And then normally I get an email saying that the terms and conditions of the previous year lease have, um, you know, been in this lease. So whenever there's been an issue, I had to look at my original lease, and see if there's see what the language was, and that worked for me for the most part. But I do know some people have had times where they do get to stay in the place for another year, but the terms have changed a little bit, and sometimes they didn't read it. Sometimes they went back and changed to say that the building is no longer responsible for pest control. The tenant is, or the tenant's responsible for paying half the cost, or something weird like that. Um, and I don't think all of that. I don't think it's not a traditional negotiation. Like you're not buying a car, you're living in a place, and so they shouldn't be able to just like sneak things in. I also think you shouldn't be able to do that with a car, but that's further in the video. If they don't give you that notice, I think that the lease should automatically renew at the same terms. I think also they should have to give you reasonable time, um, when they reasonable notice to tell you when they are going to be raising the rent, and that's including what I said before about stabilizing the rent and having maximums and everything. They don't have to raise the rent every year. I've lived at some places where they didn't raise rent, and it was like, all right, whatever, nothing's changed. And then I've lived at some places, including at one of these places, because again, I like to stay in places when I can. Where literally all they did was paint new lines in the parking lot, and they raised our rent $50 a month. And it's just like, all right, you have to do this anyway, and this is your place. Like, why do I have to pay for you to paint and pave the parking lot that you were required to do anyways? Um, I think that's a big change I think we need to do, and a barrier that I personally have had, you may have noticed in some of my videos, in different locations, I've had some housing issues of my own. The security deposit is a big problem. Um, the reason we have security deposits is to try to get around people that don't have, the credit score that landlords are looking for. And credit is supposed to be a stand-in because we can't predict the future. This is supposed to tell renters or landlords, I should say, how likely it is that the tenant will pay rent on time, and based off of how often they've paid um, their previous creditors. It's silly on its face. My first place that I moved into, I didn't have any credit because I was 18, moving into a place 2 weeks after high school, after graduation. Um, and so I ended up having had a co-signer who was my brother, who also hadn't never rented a place, but he had just went to the military the year before, and so had stable income, and we just had to have another adult there on the lease and such. And then I had to pay. Um, I want to say my first security deposit was like $500 straight because the place was $500 a month, um, for a studio apartment actually, and it was worth about $500 a month, maybe a little bit less, honestly. This place, this place wasn't well insulated, and so during the summer, between noon and 2, you couldn't actually go in the place because it was too hot. And it was so hot, for example, that you couldn't have any metal or electronics in the living room. It's a studio, so in the room closest to the door because it would melt it. Um, any food and such that I had couldn't be left out during certain times because yeah, like if it was chocolate, if it was like anything, um, it would melt. And then in winter, there was a gap in the door about this big, and it had on these old school air conditioners from like hotels, and it would take like 5 days for the heat to kick on, and then it would take another 5 days to go back to cool. And the Florida winters are weird. Some days it's 70 degrees, some days it's 40. So um, my first place was in St. Petersburg, Florida, downtown. There was a big double parking lot, and you couldn't park there because there was a place next to you, which was a luxury apartment that had all the parking spots. But it was a luxury apartment and also a 65 or 55 and up community. And almost only two people had a car, even though there were 53 spots. But every day they came and told people from the unit, um, who didn't have a special tag from the luxury condos. Um, So, anyways, I'm telling you that because have this in your mind. It wasn't the greatest place to live, and I still had to give a security deposit. And the security deposit was supposed to be used in case there were any damages, in case I didn't pay rent, in case, those are the two major ones basically. Um, and I never talked to the landlord the entire time I was there. I met them once when I signed the lease, and then, when I told them I wasn't renewing the lease at the end of it. And then I told them, don't worry about the security deposit. They can keep it in lieu of the last month's rent. And that was that. But the ordeal of coming up with a security deposit and going through all that um, was a lot. It was, I had to, work extra and then go to Amscot, which is a cash advance place, um, and pay, I want to say it's like 30% interest rate or something like that. It might be even higher. Sometimes they go up to like 200% interest rate. Um, but I ended up having to pay like $600 back to Amscot, all to just move into this place, and I didn't break anything. It was pretty broken when I moved in. And I don't know. It's been a barrier as the rent has gone up, as I needed more space, and as the security deposit is $1,000 or $2,000, and then sometimes they also want the first month rent and the last month rent, and so you might have to come up with $3,000 to $6,000 up front for a place that still might not be great. So instead of doing that, I think we should turn it around and have it where if we want security deposits, the tenant pays into a bank account that they own that pays interest every month, and they're not allowed to touch it for a year. And then if they keep staying in that place, if they stay in the same rental location, they just keep it in there. And if there's any issues or anything that needs to be repaired, they can always take it from there. If they stay there long enough and they want to move into another place, they can just carry that on, and that also acts as collateral. And eventually, if they want to be able to take this and use it to pay for their down payment, they can do that for a house. They can also do that. They can add to it at any time. I think it should have to stay within a certain level for the first few years, but past a certain age, they should be able to empty it if they'd like, or if they're no longer a renter, or if they move to a different state, they should be able to just carry it with them. And this would get rid of a lot of issues because I've had issues twice now, and currently getting my rental deposit back, even when it's clear to everybody that nothing's broken, and if there's anything broken, it's not the tenant's responsibility. Sometimes the landlords just say no, and there's not actually real recourse for it. There's, you go to housing court, you get a date in court, and you appeal to a judge, and sometimes the judge just, says yes or no. Sometimes they're like, you need to take this to small claims and sue your landlord. And a lot of times it's more expensive to hire the lawyer and sue the landlord. And even if you have a clear case and you can reasonably expect that they will pay your legal fees, you have to come up with that either up front or work out a deal with your attorney to not get paid in case they win, unless they win. But then if you do that, they take a big chunk of your money. You have to miss work. You have to plan around that. Sometimes there's clauses and rental agreements where they won't rent to people with ongoing lawsuits, specifically to rent. So if you sue your last landlord, they won't rent to you. I think that should be illegal and also none of their business. And I think apartments and condos and landlords really shouldn't be able to share information like that. Um, that would also be in the Bill of Rights. But the security deposit, just simply taking it from the landlords, keeping it to you, because right now, the way we have it, landlords are supposed to take the money and put it in a savings account. Um, some states or counties say it can be an interest bearing one, and some say it can't. Um, I've never got the interest back from my security deposit, so just that. Sometimes it just gets pocketed, but a lot of times landlords just spend it, even though they're legally not supposed to. There's not really anyone looking over their shoulders to make sure that they don't. And sometimes they keep it until the end, but they're like, these blinds are broken. You left fridge in the cabinet. Or you left food in the cabinet. Or there's some scratches here. Like the closet's broken, and they just take the whole thing. Personally, I think it's their house, and they should be responsible for fixing their house. Unless you did something that's like some structural damage or something like really abnormal for the time you've lived there, then that's the cost of doing business, and this is supposed to be a business for them. But somehow it's only a business for them when it's convenient. When it's just hey, eventually you're gonna have to repaint your walls. If people live here. Eventually, you're going to have to hire somebody to double check the pipes and wires and fix plumbing and do all these things. And if you have some cheaply installed closet doors and you're renting the families, the kids are probably going to break them eventually. Um, and in cases where the tenant actually has to pay for stuff, then it should be you know just a portion of what does it cost. If they broke the door, for example, because they were, somebody broke down the door or something, it's like, yeah, all right, maybe the tenant should be responsible for part of that or a window or something. Um, but if it's like some scratches on the paint, no, it should have to eat that. It's cost of doing business. I think tenants should also just have more rights to change things around the place. They should be able to paint their room if they want to. Um, if the landlord really has an issue with like certain colors, or if they want to reach an agreement with the tenant, if you're only going to be there for 6 months, maybe they don't want the tenant painting every room in the house bright yellow. Like that seems reasonable to me. But they should also be able to, do things outside. If the tenant's going to be there for a year and they want a garden, they should legally be allowed to have a garden. If it's like a permanent alteration, like you're having a landscaping company come and uproot all the grass and like put a pond there and stuff, it's like, yeah, you should have to get um, that cleared by the landlord because that's reasonable. That's a permanent change. But if you want to grow food, I think the only thing your landlord should reasonably be able to push back on is permanent alteration. So maybe they're like, hey, I don't want you to plant this directly in the ground, or with the expectation that if you do plant this directly in the ground, at the end of your lease, we may, uproot this all. But what do you care? You're not moving there anymore, anyways. Maybe they want you to have a raised bed or something. I also think that's possibly illustrated in my story before. Residents should and their guests shouldn't be able to be towed away from their property um, without written or recorded permission. You live there, and because you live there, it should be assumed that you have shared access to the space. Right now, there's a lot of places that just get away with like some weird rules about what you can do with your car. It makes sense to me to limit how many cars a household has to, one car per adult. Whatever, that makes sense. It gets tricky sometimes if you have like a 16, 17-year old. Um, but that seems easy enough to figure out, honestly. If you're in a place with like maybe only like 4 spots and it's like a triplex or something, I can see how that can cause tension. But in a lot of places I've lived, there's been like have big open lots that have never had all their spots filled, even the holidays when they've lifted towing restrictions, even Thanksgiving and stuff where people are visiting. There's plenty of spots, but they have a contract with the tow truck company that just comes and just like tows people at odd times for literally no reason. It's not bothering anybody. The towing isn't solving an issue. It's just it's just expensive, very very expensive. So I think they just shouldn't be able to do it unless there's written permission or unless there's an emergency. Um, Maybe in extreme cases, if a car has been there for like a week, put a notice on there and you have 3 days to remove it or something, and then after that, then you can remove it. But just showing up 5 o'clock at night and just towing because you don't have the right sticker and there's like 10 empty spaces between you, no, we got to stop that. We have to just change that altogether. By virtue of you living there, you've been granted access to the space, and by all rights, you are in a space sharing agreement with them. And we wouldn't expect that someone would just come and pick up your desk and take it away, like at your job, right? If you have an office, um, usually they talk to you and be like, "Hey, signing has just started. We're gonna actually try to switch those offices around." Um, we should do that with cars too. We need some reform for all non-governmental bodies, honestly, but homeownership associations are getting out of control, and they have powers by virtue of just saying they have powers, and you pay into them, and sometimes they have control that you can't really. get around. Like they're not a government agency. They're not a police department. They're that haven't been. I mean, sometimes elections and stuff like that, but there's not really a way to get around them unless they do something that you can prove is illegal. So we need some reform so that they don't really have a role in increasing rent, reducing options, or limiting housing stocks. A lot of times they are a barrier. They will say, you can't have this kind of yard next to here, or sometimes it comes up where uh, affordable housing can't be built in the neighborhood because the residents say no. And sometimes it's not the residents, sometimes it's the homeownership association, who a lot of times their only job is to keep property rates high. Um, so again, people can sell their houses and retire, um, whatever. I just don't think that they're the most useful thing in society. Um, I think we should repeal the Fair Cloth Amendment to the Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act of 1998. I may never remember the full title of that. I have it written down here. So if you just ask me that in the street, if you say anything other than the Fair Cloth Amendment, I'm gonna be like, it's called the what now? And I'm only reasonable and confident in the year if you ask me in the wild. And I won't even say the acronym because it makes less sense. But the Fair Cloth Act basically reduces the number of public housing units available. It has an artificial limit to how many how many public housing units, government housing units are available compared to non-public. So it makes it so that there's always going to be more private um, units by a whole lot compared to public because there was this fear of socialized housing basically that if the government is in the market that other institutions can't compete fairly. I think that's silly. um, I think the government could reasonably have 30% of the public housing of the housing market, and the private businesses will be fine. Private businesses right now, private landlords are split between individual mom and pop owners that have, maybe one or two houses that they're renting out. Maybe they're in a nursing home, but they haven't sold their house. They don't have kids, and they just want the income. Maybe they live in Maryland and have a vacation rental in Florida, and they rent that out. Um, maybe, or maybe they're a larger entity that has 10 to 30 units in a location, or maybe you're like a mega corporation, or investment company that owns like whole city blocks. I think those are three separate um, entities that have three separate, you know, levels of income, first of all, but also interest. The person or people that just own one house or two houses that they're renting out, they might be a little bit more sensitive to changes in the so-called market or rules and stuff. But they can always sell their house. I'm not that sympathetic about it, honestly. I think we should prioritize housing for people living in them, and if people find that being a landlord is too expensive or too cumbersome, that is fine. Like any other job, you should be able to quit it and do something that fulfills you more. And this is a job that a lot of times people make, thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars every year by not doing anything. We call it passive income for a reason. And as that, I mean, that's the case. And we still have people, and some of those are, homeless veterans sleeping on the street under bridges and dying of hypothermia or starvation in the year 2026. I don't think we should waste time concerning ourselves about the tiers of landlords. Instead, I think we should increase the amount of houses the government owns, and if it gets to be too much, and we've solved the housing crisis, we can always sell those units to either individuals, which I think would be the preferred thing we do, um, preferably the individuals that are staying in those homes, or we can sell it to private landlords, and that's that. government will get some more income, and private landlords will have more in the housing stock. But the reason we're in this predicament now isn't because there's too many public housings or too many vouchers. It's because we have too many private entities buying up housing stock and waiting till the prices go up, and they get a say when the prices go up, and then no one can afford to live in their hometown. I think we also should just get rid of application fees. I think it's crazy that someone goes in and applies for an apartment and they're responsible for paying for the background check or the time that someone's going to utilize it, or the third party provider that's, they're paying to go through this stuff. Sometimes they just pocket the money. Sometimes they've already made the decision, and there's in a lot of places no legal um, uh, there's nothing making them stop taking the money before they um, make a decision. You don't know as the renter or potential renter if they made the decision yesterday before you paid or today after you paid. Just get rid of them. They're pretty low anyway. A lot of times they're $25 most of the time. Sometimes they're 50. Sometimes they're $25 per dog. Sometimes, annoyingly, they're $25 per resident of the house, which is crazy because yeah, is my 8-year old the hang up in this? No, it's whoever is paying going to be paying for it, and it's not going to be her. We should also ban fines, fees, or additional costs related to parking. Again, you live there. Most people are going to drive to and from their place. They've already built the parking lot. They can't just make more money off of these just random fees. Like they charge you extra money to use the gym that's already there, or they charge you extra money to park your car in a covered garage that's already there. It's like, no, we should just get rid of that. So that was housing. The rest of it is probably going to be a little bit more streamlined, um, and I won't go through all of it in as much detail. But again, the Housing Bill of Rights is that's an idea of what I want to do, and probably the um, bill that I will push the hardest and soonest in Congress. There will be more to it, and some of these issues, intersect. I say all of them intersect, but specifically at housing, we'd also have to do things specific for students, and we'd also have to do things specifically. If you watch my stabilization videos on the Green New Deal, this Green New Deal for a housing plan, I'm all for that. But moving on, Donald Trump actually signed on to a good idea. It doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere, but he signed on to Elizabeth Warren's idea to cap interest rate at 10%. He said it for a year, and he said it only for credit cards. But I think it doesn't have to just be for credit cards. I think it's crazy. We just have interest rates at like 37% or 40%, or like I mentioned, at these credit lending places or cash advance places. Sometimes it's like 100, 200%, depending on when you're supposed to pay it back. And that's just insane. Like, no one can reasonably pay these things back, and you just get in a cycle and you're just stuck. So, 10%. I think that would drastically reduce individual debt. And then I think all interest should also be forgiven after 1 year of the original principal being paid. So, for most people, that a car is where this comes up. I bought my car. It's a 2016 Honda Fit, and I bought it in 2016, and it actually ended up being a cheaper option than some of the used cars. Um, I really haven't had any issues with it that were caused from just I had normal wear and tear, and I had some issues specifically with from being towed and a car accident recently. But I haven't had any issues from the actual model. It's a good car. Sadly, discontinued the Fit. They should bring it back. Um, but what I paid for it, um, I think I ended up paying about $20,000, but in the lot it's $16,000. So with the interest, I had to pay about $4,000 extra on interest, and I paid it off over 5 years. Um, so it's like whatever. That's their business model. That's how they get to sell you cars when you don't have $16,000 in your hand. My wife also, we bought her a car. I bought her a car at the same time, and it was a 2012 used Honda CRV. Not as good of a deal, but she wanted a bigger car. She wanted to be higher up, easier to put the car seats in. At the time we bought them, we had one kid and expected to have another, which we ended up doing eventually. Um, so there's that. And her car, I think the sticker price was $18,000, but her interest rate was higher than mine, so we ended up paying $27,000 on hers. So we paid, you a bit about yeah, $9,000 more than the principal, and we had both of those cars at the same time, paid off within about a year of each other. So we paid almost the cost of my car um, just in interest rates. We could have got another car if the interest rates were zero, basically. And I'm not even saying that they should be zero. I just think they should be, capped. 10% is fine. It can be lower for plenty of things. But also, even if it's at a higher rate, I paid off my principal. I think you're three and a half or four. I paid extra every month because I wanted it to make sure I didn't get in a spiral. I've seen plenty of my parents' cars get repossessed, and a lot of those were used cars that were cheaper and broke down all the time. So half the time we couldn't even use it, and so sometimes it was a godsend when they came and towed it, and we didn't have to worry about fixing it one more time or being on the highway trying to change a belt or fix a tire or whatever. But I don't want to deal with any of that. I don't know. By the end of the year four, I had already paid it off my car. I think all interest should have just been forgiven. That would have made life a lot easier. The bank had already been paid back. The um, whatever Honda dealership I bought it from, I no longer remember the name, had long been paid back. The I was just paying the bank extra money at that point. But if we just had this one little change, it would save Americans hundreds of dollars every month. It would save some thousands of dollars every year, some even more depending what you're paying for. And specifically for student loans, there shouldn't be any interest or student loans. It should be 0% for public schools, and maybe private student loans be at 5% at the max. But the state has a vested interest in the educated populace. I know Donald Trump feels like he doesn't, and that's why he wants to get rid of the Department of Education. But if you want doctors, you want lawyers, you want nurses, you want teachers, you want any of these things, they need to go to school. And even if you want, artists and engineers and they gotta go to school. Um, so why are we making them pay to go to school? And if we are making them pay to go to school, we should make it easier. So if they can get on a loan and they got the degree and they're gonna pay it back and you can't discharge it, then just just 0%. I think we also should just make it free, but skipping ahead. Um, Contracts should also reasonably do, well, moving to a different section. I think we should have contract reform, and I think contracts should reasonably do what they say they're going to do. If you are a movie star and you sign a contract to say that you are going to get 10% of the proceeds from the movie, you should reasonably get 10% of the proceeds from the movie. You shouldn't have some Hollywood lawyer being like, huh, but if we do this one gimmick, we can pretend that while Avatar is making billions of dollars, I'm just picking Avatar, I don't know if they actually specifically did this, um, we're going to have it so their stars aren't going to get paid because we're going to say they technically haven't made a profit yet. Because that's happened in a lot of movies. I know Coming to America that happened. A lot of '90s movies that happened were musicians that happened. If you watch the Diddy documentary that 50 Cent produced, because he's petty, but it was a good documentary. You go and you see how many people that worked under Bad Boy Entertainment label didn't get paid, never got paid, and there's been some lawsuits against the label that were that the victims never got the money because of some gimmicks and stuff. I just think that if you sign a contract, it should do what you think it's supposed to do. And that might be like high level, like I'm not a movie star, I'm not a musician, like what do I care? Okay, what about car insurance? Like I think that they only hire. I feel like you have two paths in the world if you're a sociopath. You can be a dentist or you can be a car insurance rep. Um, that seems to be based on my experience. I'm sorry, car insurance people and dentists. I've met plenty of y'all who are lovely. I haven't actually had any negative experience with the dentist. I'm just a baby. But car insurance, you pay for car insurance. You get into a crash, you call them because that's what you're supposed to do. That's the whole reason you have to have it for this state mandated thing. In every state, you have to have car insurance, and they tell you what kind of car insurance you have to have. So I think that little required piece of car insurance that you're supposed to have is supposed to cover you and the car. That's what you expect. However, every time you get into a car accident, they quibble over who's responsible and if they are responsible for paying. And they're like, oh, if only you had another product of ours, which is $37.99, we'd pay you for this. But since you don't, the other people are responsible for that. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, isn't it your job to get the money from them? It's like, yes. So are you gonna do that? No. Okay. That's weird. You call other insurance companies just like, oh, actually, that's your company's job. Um, we're not contesting that we're at fault, or maybe we are contesting we're at fault, but right now they're responsible for fixing this and then trying to get reimbursed. I think that the consumer should reasonably expect that they are going to get the number that it says that they're going to get every time they pay their policy and re up their policy and say maybe say like $50,000 personal body injury insurance or whatever, and some like lower amount for the car, maybe it's $20,000 for the car or whatever. And a lot of times it's not that big of a deal. Maybe it's a fender bender. Maybe it just costs $500 for Honda to look at it and another $1,000 for them to fix the body damage. You fix it, you move on, everyone's happy. You probably will keep that insurance next year. So we should do that. Some contract reform, make it streamlined. Maybe it'd be shorter contracts too, so it's not 20 pages of things trying to trick you and saying who's, Disney doesn't get to ignore a liability because you signed Disney Plus liability agreements or whatever. Um, I also think non-disclosure agreements must expire after a year unless a court order is sought to send the time or some reasonable responsibility of the job. An example for the last one is like maybe you work in an intelligence agency or you work in government and you can't reasonably disclose state secrets. Or I worked in juvenile justice, and even though the timeline has long since passed, I probably still won't talk about like individual cases because they were minors. That just makes sense. Doctors, they probably will never talk about individual facts of cases because they're doctors. That makes sense. Um, those are more ethical expectations and non-disclosure agreements, but I feel like those are the closest things I can think of to reasons why you wouldn't be able to speak your mind. I myself had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with Feeding America when I left them. Um, Not on my terms, but I can't tell you why because I signed a non-disclosure agreement 2 years ago, even though it's their fault and they did the things. um, they are a charity that operates with their name being their most important asset, and so they have a vested interest in making sure that no one can say anything to ruin that image. And I am just of the opinion that people should be able to talk unfettered, and if somebody did something wrong, you shouldn't be able to skate away just because you're a big, powerful entity and you've made them sign an agreement in order to, get a settlement. Same with non-compete clauses. I think they should expire 6 months after leaving an employer. Most of the time, it's come up that sometimes they um, affect people at work. Like if you go from Subway to Quiznos, you're not allowed to go to the Quiznos because you might take trade secrets. You don't need trade secrets from Subway. It's not that good. And they change stuff so often. Like 6 months later, the information might not even be worth anything. Um, and there's already, corporate espionage laws that are separate from the non-compete things. The non-compete is just keeping low-wage workers from being able to go to a competitor. There's been times where it's like Lowe's and Home Depot or McDonald's and Burger King. Just get rid of all those. We talked about it a lot, and we had some minor changes in 2019 or 2020. Um, but just a complete overhaul, federal, ban on them and some guidance. We're coming up on an hour, and so I don't want to make this video too long, but we need to do and just talk about Feeding America, and then some of this experience comes from Feeding America, where I got to sit in on policy, and I was on the advocacy team and communications team. I got to talk to lots of food insecure people that we refer to as neighbors, and I um, also just growing up and now I've been food insecure. I've personally utilized Snap and WIC as a youth and then also as a parent. Um, Same with school lunches and breakfasts and lots of the programs that give food to people. I've also helped get food to lots of people, either at a food bank, at a food pantry, at church, um, passing out sandwiches and stuff to the Hunting House community. Um, just small side part of that. If you do that, you should make sure you hand it to them, not just throw it next to them, especially in cities like DC that have rats. Because, yeah, you don't want rats crawling on you. Waking up with rats crawling on you is not ideal. Um, so saying that, I have a lot of experience with how our food system work, how corporations impact that, and some basic things that we can do to change it. Um, we can definitely increase the benefit amount for SNAP. It should be enough to reasonably be able to buy everything you need in a month. The benefits are monthly. You just get a lump sum of cash on the benefit day, if in case you've never interacted with this program. And the amount can seem quite random. In college, when I got it for the first time, I got it. I got like $35. It's not worth the effort of applying. And in Florida, they make you do a phone interview, and sometimes you're just there on the phone, keep calling and hoping it doesn't hang up for hours, and then only for them to tell you you need to come in, and then you're sitting there all day, and then oops, person's not there today. Um, and in Florida and in lots of red states, it's purposeful to decrease how many people are on the program, how many apply. To want lower numbers so that they can brag that they are lowering their numbers when California's numbers are going up, but really California's just been responsible in just feeding their people. But you can increase the benefit amount of SNAP. I didn't put a number on the website. Um, During COVID, we increased it to an appropriate amount that actually reflected like real poverty, not the current poverty line we had, and I thought that was great. Um, Sometimes on a personal level, it felt like you know I could have survived with less money, but it's nice to be able to thrive. Um, so also ending the mid-year review for SNAP and adding a 3-year grace period for changes to income before kicking enrollees off of benefits. Right now, in lots of states, there's a 3-month review. Sometimes, or some there's a mid-year review. Sometimes there's a 3-month review. Um, and again, sometimes the only purpose of that is to kick people off, because if you don't show up to that, then they disenroll you and they just assume that your circumstances have changed or you're not in compliance, and so now they kick you off, and that's just silly. Just give it. If somebody qualifies in January, even if they get a job in March, they're probably going to be impacted the rest of the year. Food's expensive. You need time to actually reasonably be able to pay your bills, have money in the bank, be able to, weather any storms if there's like, another lost job or you get a flat tire or something like that. Yeah, just give it to them for a whole year. And then if there's any change to income, give them that grace period so that they can wean themselves off of the program. We also just need universal free lunch and breakfast in public schools, with maybe some subsidies in private schools. But personally, I think our tax money should go to public resources, not private ones. But I also think that kids shouldn't starve because their parents want to pretend they're rich. So there's that too. We should end subsidies for sugar, corn, etc. You can go and look at the big eight, I think, sometimes the big five, of things we subsidize. Tobacco's in there sometimes too, and so it's weird. It's not all food, but there's things that we subsidize that people will buy anyways. Sometimes people will buy no matter what it costs, like sugar. We have a lot of different subsidies, or not subsidies, substitutes for sugar, and so even if the price of sugar doubled, people would buy that or one of the substitutes. I don't know why we're still subsidizing sugar. We're subsidizing sugar and paying people to grow more of it while people are growing sugar in places like the Everglades where they're just clearing forests so they can put more sugar cane up. We're paying for our downfall basically. We're paying um, to make the climate crisis worse so that we can get something that's actually not that good for us. Um, but not all that good for us, not good for us at all. Definitely, like I have a sweet tooth. I like cookies and ice cream and cakes and pies and all the things, honestly. But we don't need sugar put into everything, and we don't need to pay farmers to grow more of that. And same with corn. We grow so much corn that we've started using it as a fuel source because we've had so much of it and it was going to waste. We feed it to cows. Cows' stomachs aren't really designed to eat corn, and so that's caused issues too. And again, I like corn. Corn's good, and we have a lot of sorry, earbuds were dying. We have a lot of um, hungry people and starving people, if we're honest, that in the country, and things like corn and beans and rice are life saving. And so I'm not saying it's bad. It's just a cheap crop that all you need to do honestly is ban Monsanto from being able to have a monopoly on corn seeds, and everybody can grow corn. It's actually really easy to grow yourself in most of America. Um, you can grow the fun multicolored ones, which aren't really as edible, or you can just grow the everyday yellow corn. There's like 5 different varieties, I think. But yeah, if you're in Middle America, Monsanto will sue you if your seeds end up in their fields or vice versa. So there's that. Remove the subsidies and subsidize local fruits and veggies instead. So we look at the region, we look at places like Maryland, which grows plenty of apples, and we can subsidize growing those apples. Or Florida, maybe oranges and citrus and such, bananas, um, and other things elsewhere. Again, I don't know if we need to subsidize potatoes in Idaho, but it wouldn't offend me if we made it easier to eat local. But the biggest change we should do is just changing, and the simplest actually, is changing the federal definition of poverty from the official poverty line to the supplemental poverty measure, SPM. Um, I encourage you to Google it, and you can see quite a lot of information about this, maybe an overwhelming amount of information. But the FDA and I think HS, Health and Human Services, have different information about this. The poverty line is used for all federal programs to determine, whether you qualify, and it's been stuck at the same level for a really long time, for like 50 to 100 years, depending on which program you're looking at. The supplemental poverty measure is a better measure to use because it takes into account some more things. Like if you've ever applied for SNAP, they don't actually use it. appropriately, but they ask you all these questions about like your expenses, and then they also look at your income, and then they're supposed to like deduct one from the other, and they don't really do that, but whatever. Um, and so the supplemental poverty measure does something like that. Like maybe you make $30,000, but like your housing is more expensive in this city versus this city, and so we're gonna say that you are meeting the poverty line, even though your take-home pay is more than here, but your expenses are higher. Um, and also, we should adjust the USDA's Thrifty Food Plan, which is not the same as the poverty line. The poverty line is just a number. You look at it, and it's a really easy thing to just like plug in and be like, oh, boom, you are 100% of the poverty line or below, or maybe you make $30,000, so you're above the poverty line, but now we have the supplemental poverty line, so you're just there. Um, but the Thrifty Food Plan looks at not just how to feed people, but at what level. And it comes from the Great Depression, as do most of these things that we haven't updated, so keep that in mind, where there were people that were starving, like industries, like bread lines were running empty. And they had basic food plans that would keep people alive, and then they had liberal food plans that would do more than keep people alive. You had like food in your fridge still. You could eat 3 meals, have enough nutrients, and maybe have a snack. And you had the thrifty food plans. As something in between, where like you have enough to eat, and you also, you know, you have enough to eat, and you might have some options. And right now, we aim for people to be in the thrifty, and I think we should aim for people to be in the liberal. Like, we want people to have good options, especially with the push to reduce what you can spend your SNAP benefits on. If you can't buy junk food, it's like, all right, well, can you go buy pomegranates? Because pomegranates are kind of pricey, but they're a pretty good snack, especially if you can already get them peeled. Just gotta get the seeds. I mean, right now the answer is no. It's not like they're adjusting the amount. So yeah, that's what I think we should do on food. I think we also should end some banking discrimination. And just saying that, you can be like, oh, what do you mean? There's so much banking discrimination. You mean race-based? Yeah. Sex-based? Also, yeah. But other than increasing penalties for race and gender-based discrimination, because we already have laws against those, whether they're followed or not, I think we also need to make it so banks can't discriminate you based on your job. Like, we have some laws on books that make sense on the face of them, because we had a war on drugs and, you know, also a war on sex. And we, you know, we stopped a lot of organized crime by seizing their bank accounts, allegedly. Because a lot of these places, a lot of these organizations still exist. We still have a mob. But these rules now stop legal cannabis owners from storing their money in banks. Sometimes the bank owners will just say no. Sometimes they'll say yes and then change their mind. Sometimes the feds will raid the banks and take the money. I think that's crazy. That's why there was a marijuana banking act that passed the House, overwhelming numbers. I think it was like 300 something to like 20. So both parties, you know, signed on to it, but then it died in the Senate, as lots of things do. And I think that was at the end of, it was either at the end of Trump's last term or the beginning of Biden's beginning of Biden's term. But it's not law, so we should just bring that back up and make it law. But also things like, you know, OnlyFans. There's lots of OnlyFans creators that, you know, if they're in North Carolina or Texas or you know, sometimes in, you know, safe blue places, they'll have their bank access frozen, or they'll all of a sudden get a message saying they've been rejected, and their money just like gets sent back to them, and they're unbanked. And you know, having all your cash under a mattress has long been understood not to be a good idea, and there's lots of benefits to having a bank account. such as being able to, have your money in one place, and also there's like, trying to buy a house or anything. A lot of times you need a bank account. A lot of times that's what they look at um, as your oldest account. So get rid of the discrimination. I'm going to breeze through some of these, but I think we should enact a personal data transaction fee. Corporations shouldn't just be able to steal our money and then sell it back to us. We should get a cut anytime they're utilizing our data, and whether that's in ads and products, if they're using it to sell stuff back to us, we should get a portion of that. We should also limit how much data corporations have of us. There's some information they don't actually reasonably need, and some that they should not be able to legally get. They also shouldn't be able to spy on us all the time through our phones. We should have education reform. We will probably have to start by just saving the Department of Education or bringing it back in some form, since Donald Trump's done his best to kill it, which is crazy. It's a whole department, and he's just trying to pull out all the functions and put it elsewhere. But short of that, I think Zoran and many of the people before him, Elizabeth Warren being one of them, who proposed universal pre-K, were right. I think Kentucky enacted universal pre-K like almost 15 years ago, and it's been going great. We should do that nationwide. If we had an education system and a childcare system that worked more from birth to college graduation, and it was a little bit more seamless, we would have a lot less struggles. We would have I gotta plug my computer in. That's where my notes are. We would have just less trouble. We would solve a lot of issues in society. Right now, if you have not had at least for me, the pleasure of being a parent, you may be unaware of housing is expensive too. Just how much childcare truly is. Most of the time when I've had to pay for childcare, it was either the most expensive or second most expensive bill that I had to pay, and usually I had to pay weekly, if not daily. So if we had universal pre-K, that would at the very least solve for 1 year, if not 2 years, depending on how old your kid will be when they go to pre-K. It's one less year you have to pay for daycare or nanny, and pre-K has shown to have just some really great benefits, social benefits, and also picking up on some of those concepts that become important through K to 12. Speaking of K to 12, I think we should increase the base pay of teachers in the federal government to subsidize it. They should set a minimum wage of $45,000 for K to 12 public school teachers, and every school district can figure out, how much to pay more or than that, raises and such. But $45,000, I think, would be probably a fair wage, and is what a fair amount of teachers end up with, towards the end of their term, if they work for 20, 30 years. I just think we should start them at that. Reward people for raising our kids, or helping raise our kids, and that helps with teacher retention. It actually gives teachers a time to relax, because, fun fact, a lot of teachers have second and third jobs, sometimes during the school year, sometimes during the summer or breaks. I had my French teacher was also a realtor and also a caterer. My what did they even call him? My economics teacher was also my best friend's dad, but he didn't get paid for that. But was our track and cross country coach, which you get paid a stipend for those, and was also a camp counselor, and also did some other stuff. I know far fewer teachers that only have one job, and that's just my experience. I'm sure y'all have your own experiences as well. You've talked to teachers. You've gone to school. Maybe you yourself are a teacher. They just don't get paid enough. In DC and Maryland, they get paid a little bit more than the average, which is great. But sometimes they don't get paid enough either, depending on what county you're in, what district you're in. So make minimum wage $45,000 for K-12 public school teachers, and then the federal government subsidize it, and then I'm hoping it'll be higher at places that put a premium on education, which will just wipe out student loan debt and also make community colleges and public universities tuition free for all 4 years. I also think we should subsidize grad school, specifically for things like, medical profession and education, things we have shortages of. We saw during COVID that we just don't have enough doctors or nurses or medical researchers or public health specialists, virologists. We need a lot more of those. So why are we making them jump through loopholes of I think there still needs to be an admissions process, but a lot of times the admissions process is arbitrary, and it's delaying some people from getting to the school and graduating and becoming a nurse or whatever, because there's limited spots because of the cost, and colleges sometimes want to bring in people that they know have the money. So there's that. But wipe out debt, make college free. We subsidize the student housing to drastically reduce the price. For me, the housing cost was the most expensive part of college. Housing and transportation was far more expensive than the actual tuition, which for me at least was mostly paid for. I had a fair amount of scholarships and grants. Some lasted like a semester, some paid for like a class, some just paid for books. Some semesters I got books for free. It was a hodgepodge system that eventually ran out my senior year, and that's when I took out loans. Actually, the last semester of my junior year. And if I had went to school maybe a year later or 5 years before, I wouldn't have been affected by the changes to one of my grants, Bright Futures, or another, Doorways, that was mostly affected by the recession. But I did have the pleasure of graduating in the year 2010, which does mean I missed my high school reunion because of COVID. So being a millennial is fun sometimes. I think we should also reduce the barriers for students to receive federal aid programs such as SNAP, Medicaid, and child care. A lot of times the policies are designed thinking that that there's kids that are going to be going to college, but you're 17, 18 most of the time when you go to college, sometimes 16 in rare cases. And I get the logic, but there's some 16, 17, 18-year-olds that have children and or are poor. And B, there's plenty of people that return to college in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and so we should have programs that reflect that. There's lots of extra requirements and changes for if you're a student and trying to get SNAP, because the assumption is that your parents have money and your parents can provide for you, and for a lot of us, that's not true. I quickly started making more money than my parents when I started working, and they couldn't help me. They want to help me, they love me, but they just couldn't help. But we had to, for SNAP, you have to, prove that you're actually going to school, prove that you're a full-time student, bring in that paperwork. And that helps with the work requirements, but in recent changes, you also still have to work, and even if you don't, even if you get approved, it's not like you're getting a whole lot of extra money. They kind of just want to push you to the school and have the school give you a meal plan that you have to pay for to fix it. We should also just regulate the types of fees and amount that colleges can assess on students. I would look at my bills sometimes and be like, what's the technology fee? Y'all didn't give me any technology. I got to use your computers, but What? And then and then sometimes they charge you a virtual learning fee if you take an online class, but if you're in person, they charge you a in-person fee. They call it something different. They charge you for the sports complex, and I never went to a single game at USF. And the USF doesn't even have like we have sports, but like we don't have a stadium. We use Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, um, and so the fees are crazy. We should regulate those and also set a maximum limit for the cost of textbooks and required materials. Textbooks are crazy, and then when you try to sell them back, you get like $20, but you bought it for 200. It's insane. They should not be charging that amount of money, and also sometimes the professor gets a kickback. Sometimes the professor wrote the book and requires the book, and you feel the kind of way when you have to pay $400 for this, and sometimes the professor doesn't even get that money, or doesn't get near enough of the money. So it's not good for anybody. And lastly, for the college portion, as I already mentioned, I also think grad school in a lot of cases should be debt free. The state has a vested interest in educating people to fill some needed positions. We don't have enough doctors, public defenders, judges, engineers, professors, ecologists, etc. Um, if we are going to do something about the climate, we are going to need a lot of people that know what they're talking about the climate and know how to respond to it. We're going to need some engineers to build things. We're going to need um, if we want to face our immigration system, we need more immigration judges. Even without having a universal healthcare system, we don't have enough doctors. And the doctors that we have a vested interest in, being a surgeon or being something that pays a lot of money. And a lot of them, if you ask them, need to do that or feel a need to do that because they're taking in a lot of crippling debt that they'll never be able to pay back if they don't go into a certain program. So, yeah. Maryland's already increased their minimum wage to $15 an hour. So has DC, so has Virginia, and they're graduated, and so by a certain year, they're in. I still think it's worth advocating for because everyone else hasn't done it. There's a handful of states that have raised it to $15, some 12, some 10, some have it at 15, but it's like a 10-year timeline. Um, Part of what I would do also is not just having a federal minimum wage. I think nationwide we should just get rid of the tip minimum wage. At the very minimum, we should raise the tip minimum wage to maybe what the current minimum wage is now at around $8. Right now, I think it's at $2.26. They might have doubled it to $4, but I think it's around $2.26, and that's the amount of per hour that a restaurant worker has to get paid, for example. But then if they get tips, then that supplements that. Technically, the law is that if they don't make at least as much as minimum wage, their employer is still responsible for filling the difference. People don't like to hear that when you're talking about tipping because, the easiest thing for all of us to do is just stop tipping for a week and make the employer pay for it, and then we fix the problem. But we've been guilted into thinking that we need to tip. First it was 10%, and 15, and 20, and 25, and so now you hear some people talk about we need 30 at the minimum, and you see people being like, tip your landlord, and it's just crazy. Get rid of the tip minimum wage, and I'd say that also. I've worked in restaurants before you come at me, and I promise you, I've worked at a restaurant where I did get paid a minimum wage, and then any tips that came in addition were nice but not guaranteed. And then I've worked at places where we were surviving on tips, and it was just crazy and it's hectic. I've also been a benefit enrollment specialist and had to figure out and navigate how to get this person benefits because they qualify on paper, but they also, if they get approved for this program, they're not getting approved for this program because they've had to tell these people that they make what they actually make, including the tips. And it's about $30,000 a year, which is way too much for this program. It shouldn't be, but it was. But for this program, they're only counting to 226, and then it's just like, oh, okay. Did your did your employer make up the difference? No. Okay, I'm supposed to refer you to a lawyer to get your money, and that's a whole bunch of just can of worms. It encourages people to lie about the tips, and maybe that's changed a little bit given the new law change on no tax on tips, which isn't permanent. It's going to expire, I think, in 2 years, and there's big carve-outs. OnlyFans, namely, you can't claim your tips earned on OnlyFans, and it's going to be a scam. We just get rid of the tip minimum wage. It's already a scam. It's just subsidizing business owners. And if you're like, my favorite burger place is going to go out of business, if they cannot both make a good burger and pay their workers fairly, our job as consumers is just to go where we want and do our job as consumers is to consume. Our job as consumers is not to prop up failing businesses. The job of the government is to ensure that everyone is being paid fairly, is in a safe working environment, and that, in this example, the food served isn't going to kill the people eating it. So those are two separate entities, and sometimes we cross. Like as a consumer, we try to take on the role of like the government or business or whatever, and being like, it's our job to keep these people employed. And that's nice that you have that mindset, but you don't have that mindset when you go to McDonald's. You don't have that mindset when you go in Starbucks. Maybe when we're boycotting one of those places, but it's no. Just get rid of tip minimum wage. They'll figure it out, and if not, they'll vacate, and another business will take their place that has their stuff together. I think we also should, and also, last thing, on tip minimum wage, the current tip rules don't apply to gig workers. So I myself now am a gig worker, and I get tips, Uber, and that what I just said still applies even with Uber. I think we should get rid of the tip minimum wage. Uber actually doesn't have a minimum wage. If you don't earn anything in an hour, you just don't get paid. That's crazy. So we should change that. But right now, Uber's system at least looks fair in terms of tips. Hear me out. If it pops up and it's an order that says $2 because somebody didn't tip, and you're like going 2 miles down the street, you can determine in that moment before you accept it, like, is it worth $2 to do this? And you can say no. In a restaurant, you can't actually do that. You can be like, all right, I'm paying $30 for this burger, and then I got to pay 25% on top of that. And then the server just has to wait until the end to get the money. They don't know how the person's going to act. They don't. The person doesn't know if they're going to like their food. It's just a mess, and it causes all kinds of confusion. On Uber's end, I think that they should have to pay a minimum wage. All gig work should have to pay a minimum wage. Maybe it's the $15 an hour minimum wage that California made them do. And I think New York City, I don't know if New York State also adopted that. And they didn't collapse. They're still working just fine in those places. But that's the last thing about the minimum wage right now. I think we should also pay people that are incarcerated the minimum wage, the normal minimum wage. So, and that means if we increase it to $15 an hour, we should also pay those people $15 an hour. Right now, we have corporations like Victoria's Secret, or we have some cities like, I want to say San Francisco, but definitely LA, that subsidizes their fire department with prison labor. And they sometimes don't pay them anything, or sometimes they pay them like 30 cents an hour. And that's crazy. If you can't make your overpriced underwear with people outside of prisons, you should at least pay the people in prison a livable wage. And you might be like, oh, we don't pay them because they don't need the money, or they don't deserve the money. Deservability doesn't have anything to do with income. We, long ago, as a nation, decided that slavery is a bad thing. And so if you don't pay people that you're making work, that's slavery, which we've abolished. I know the movie 13th came out. Very good movie by Ava DuVernay. Go see it. There's exceptions to if you're incarcerated, we just pretend that you don't have laws. But we can always push back on that. That's not a given. That's because that's how we've decided as our society, and that's how presidents have acted, and that's how the court has acted sometimes. But we can just push back on that and just do things. Give labor protections. Give normalize the wages. And if a corporation looks at that and be like, I don't want to do that, then other people outside of the prison will get the job. But if you're still not sold on that, some reasons why people are incarcerated getting better wages is better for society. A lot of times they have fees that they're never going to be able to pay, especially if they have like a 30, 40, 50-year term sentence in prison, or if they have a life sentence. Sometimes they have victim fees that they just never are going to be able to pay. It's like maybe $10,000 that they owe the victim, and they're making 30 cents an hour, or maybe not working at all. You know, this makes it easier to reasonably be able to pay for that. They can also probably pay back the state in some cases, though we have to, solidify those laws so that we don't have debtor's prisons or voluntary servitude or any weird circumstances where the state's taking too much of the money. Lastly, set up better guidelines for minimum wages industry by industry so workers can easily see what an employer should be paying at a minimum. I'd be happy with minimum wage for every single industry, and that would just make things easier. I was not swayed by the argument that people tried to use to reduce the minimum wage from going up when we had this fight way back when it was about fast food workers. A lot of people are like, fast food workers is low skill. It's not. And don't deserve the money, which is just silly to say how much money someone else deserves, which I guess is what I'm going to be accused of doing. But I'm just saying that we should have a minimum, and people can pay more than that. But like, say you look at like a school bus driver, there's a shortage nationwide, and possibly because the wages are too low. And you have to have special training. Obviously, you have to be able to work around children. Obviously, you have to be able to operate heavy machinery, and so they should be paid more than $12 an hour. And some districts are paid $12 an hour to go to 3 different schools and pick up people in between and drive a bunch of screaming, school-age children. And I don't know if they need to be paid just as much as teachers, but they do have our precious bundles of joy in their care, and I think maybe paying them a little bit more might be good. Maybe pay them as much as we pay FedEx workers. I don't know. Okay, I'm not going to go through all this, but if you go on my website, you can go and see the ideas I have on parking reform and ending predatory towing. We're still in the affordability section, and for a lot of people, they have a good steady job, they have stable housing, they, day to day they're doing fine. They're not rich, but they're not poor. But where they interact with the government the most is when they get a parking ticket. The signs were unclear, or they might have even been obscured, or they weren't paying attention, or maybe they saw it and they just decided to take the risk. And then they get charged like a $75 ticket, or $25 ticket, or $35 ticket for like being in the store for 5 minutes. And that's just silly. And places like DC, Maryland's actually, fairly okay with parking tickets, at least in my experience. Speeding tickets are crazy. I had received 1 parking ticket and 1 speeding ticket in my whole life before moving to the DMV, and now I get them like monthly. And I can test them. Like, I got one a couple weeks ago, and they dismissed it before I responded to it because they gave me a $75 ticket for running a red light. And you see in the picture that the light's green. It's not even yellow. It's just green. And I'm making a right turn. I'm not going very fast. But that was, I think that was in DC. I don't think that was in Maryland. So I think we should reduce, we should reduce the actual fees. We should also limit the amount that, we should make the process for disputing parking tickets streamlined. You shouldn't have to go to court just to dispute them. Especially because now a lot of times they're automatic. It's not an officer pulling you over and handing them to you, which I kind of appreciate, honestly. It reduces the risk of, being shot by a police officer. But machines can be wrong too, and a lot of times the people that operate the automated machines don't even live in the county. Sometimes don't even live in the state. I had to mail my dispute to a place in California the last time. Um, a lot of times they'll have like red light cameras or not red light cameras, stop sign cameras in an area for like a couple months, and then there's enough complaints and they remove them, and it's just like, all right, there were complaints, but people still paid before. Like, are you going to give those people money back, or are you going to admit that this was kind of a scam, or they were too sensitive? I don't know. And then the big portion of this, if you go and look at it, is mostly about tolling reform. As I said, I think the libertarians are right on this particular thing. I haven't actually talked to any about towing in particular, but about property rights. Like, I own my car. The towing truck company does not own my car. Neither does the property where I'm parking on. I feel like there needs to be a coordination, a conversation between the car owner and the property owner. And I've even been told from places I legally had permission to be at and was my property because of misunderstandings. I've accused and seen tow truck drivers from breaking into cars and like rifling through people's stuff. If you ask them, they're like, "No, how about I even get in there?" And then like just be on the lookout when you see somebody about to get towed. See them go in, turn on the hazard lights. Sometimes look through the things. Sometimes like disengage the parking brake, do whatever. But yeah, they very easily can break into your car and sometimes steal stuff. You know, albums go missing. If there's loose change or cash, that goes missing. And that's supposed to just be okay. I think a simple thing we do is drastically limit when they can actually tow. Short of that, or even in addition to that, we should make them videotape the whole process from the time they arrive to the time they after they drop off and unload. I think we obviously ban the tow truck drivers from going into the vehicles without permission and add some stiff fees and penalties for that. Theft is theft whether you're on a job or not. So I think they should be charged with theft if they stole your stuff. Also lower the threshold for proving damages and place a burden of proof that your car wasn't damaged by the tow truck company on the tow truck company. Currently, it's the other way around, but I didn't tell you to tow my car. You just came and did this, and it wasn't making this sound yesterday, and now it's making this sound, and I just need you to pay to like see if there's a problem. Real sorry. And also give access of the video recording to the owner of the vehicle. And I think there should be a cap to how much they can charge you. Right now, it varies county to county. Prince George's County has a certain amount, and then DC has a different amount. And sometimes it's per day. And tow truck companies are sneaky, and they'll say they towed your truck at 11:59, and that was Monday, and now it's Tuesday, and so they're charging you for 3 days instead of 2 days. So it should be $75 per 24 hours, not per day. So no more sneaky things like that. And they have to notify you. I didn't put this on here, but they should have to notify you when your car's been taken. And you might be like, that's tricky. How would they do that? They don't have your phone number. Well, the state you registered and has ways to contact you. You know, that's how you get all those tickets and stuff. They should have to be able to call you, email you, and send you a text. If there's not a system in your county for that, then they should have to make one. It doesn't seem to be that complicated. And you might be like, tow truck companies might go out of business. Cool. Great. Also, if there's a red light camera or any weird changes, there needs to be a big sign before the camera. This is an issue with speed cameras. A lot of times, like, they're downhill, partially obscured, and then you just get a ticket because gravity's the thing, and I think that's unfair. We should just get rid of any of the predatory issues, and what people want is to be able to just park unobstructed, and they don't want people blocking the driveways. You don't want people parking in disabled parking spots unless they're supposed to. You don't want people blocking fire lanes, which I agree with, but also I will say I recently had a fire truck called, and they did park in the fire lanes and everything, And so that made sense. But the fire lane is really big, and they didn't take up the whole area. But you never know where the fire is going to be, so I get that. But they still had to go on the other side and break down the fence in order to hook up their hose to the water because the condo wasn't in compliance with where the water hookup should be. And so, I don't know. I feel like at the end of the day, if you park in the fire lane, I get why they fine you and why they can tow you and stuff like that. That makes some sense. But if you're there for 5 minutes, I don't think it's as big of an issue as we make it seem. Same with the disabled parking spots. Not everyone has gone through the process to get a placard, or sometimes they're traveling and don't bring the placard. And sometimes people have, non-visible disabilities and maybe don't walk with a wheelchair, but maybe they've had like a recent injury or a chronic illness and stacking up that day. So I don't know. I feel like we could be more flexible with that. Like I like that we have designated spots for people and organizations that need it, but also I think we could be fairer about it. We need some Social Security reform. It surprises me that with such a geriatric Congress that this hasn't happened. It seems like, if anything, we should have a Social Security reform or Social Security that pays too many benefits, not enough. But we still have a whole party trying to get rid of Social Security, and so I'm guessing that's why we haven't got it. But the Democrats haven't done a great job at pushing forward for this and trying to steal away from some of those older voters. So this is part political strategy in part because it's the right thing to do, and it just stabilizes stabilizes our system. And I'm sure I'll be called all kinds of names, many of which I agree with. But I do think that the government has a responsibility from the time that you're alive to the time you die, as you're whether you pay taxes directly or not, you're an American, and that's what the government's here for your safety and security and prosperity. So I think we should double Social Security benefits. We should reduce the full retirement age to 65 and lock it in there. No more 67 and a half and keep bringing it up. That's silly. We're about to have, sorry to say it, but mass die off for boomers, and Gen X is far smaller in populations, and millennials, there's not as many as boomers, and so I don't know why we keep raising the retirement age. Reduce the full retirement age to 65. We should also, in order to pay for this, we should remove the cap that we currently have. There's an income cap, so if you make over a certain amount of money, which is around $250,000, then you no longer have to pay past that threshold. So you only pay for the first $250,000, and then even if you make $1 million, you're not paying into the system on that. We should remove that cap. There's some people that say we should just raise the cap, and we could do that, but I think we should just remove it, and that fully funds the program. And the argument is that millionaires and billionaires won't use it, and okay. There's roads I'll never use in North Dakota. I think that we should have no taxes on your first $200,000 for the year you turn 64. I think this is a good policy that it's like a last hurrah. Like 64, you make as much money as you can, and you retire at 65. You have that money in your bank account. You also get Social Security benefits, and hopefully you can live out the rest of your life doing things you want to do. If you don't want to fully retire, say you want to be a part-time teacher at your community college, that's fine. If you want to ride a book, you can also ride a bike. That sounds like a good time to do that as well. Maybe you want to be a camp counselor, or you want to work at your church. There's plenty of great part-time jobs that people can have, but it should be a choice. It shouldn't be something that you have to do because Social Security isn't enough to pay your bills, or because you've been stressed out your last couple of years and haven't been able to make the most of your last years before retirement. There's some companies and stuff that do something similar, not necessarily with taxes, but they allow you to keep working, and I know pensions aren't super common now, but like I know some places that you keep working past a certain age and just keep deferring the pension, and then it gets you get a big chunk of money when you actually do retire, and that's nice. That's a nice gift, and it's tax deferred in some cases. And there's other creative things that people do. So I think the government can do something to, kind of kind of get you to see that light at the end of the tunnel. You've worked your whole life, and now you get to retire, and you get to enjoy it. And if you change your mind at 70, and there's someone that thinks that you have the skills and you want to work for, you can always change your mind. But we should definitely create an environment so that people can retire at 65. My congressman is turning 65 in about a week, and so he should also retire. I feel comfortable to do it, but he has enough money to retire comfortably. We should also increase the asset limit for Social Security disability benefits. Right now, it's stuck at like $2,000. If you have more than $2,000, you have to sell off some assets or reduce your assets to be able to get the program, or you're in danger of losing it. Slightly related, there's a marriage penalty for Social Security disability benefits. If you get married to somebody that has Social Security disability and you make, money, they might take away that money, and they might take away that benefit from them, and then turn to you and say that you're not responsible for this person. Traditionally, that's locked in cycles of abuse, and allegations of fraud and theft of the benefits, and also it's kept people from getting married, should you still want to do that. And I think we should hire more people and put more money into the system for benefits improvement specialists to decrease the time it takes to make and approve or denial decisions. I think, like I said, the government should be responsible from cradle to grave, and Republicans say that like it's a bad thing, but we have a government to help us manage society, and we don't have a society to help us manage government. We have government's a resource, and so it should be a resource. Like, we want birth rates to go up, or some people do anyway. So in order to do that, you have to make it not backbreaking to have a kid. So I think we should have something like the child care bucks. A few people have come up with different variations of this idea, and so mine is that you would get $500 payments per child per month from birth until the child's 17th birthday for all households that earn less than $250,000 a year. For households that own more than that, that money would just go into a long-term savings account that would be given to the kid at 17. That way the kid can have the money to, maybe buy a car, go to college, maybe, move out, do what they wish. Some people might push back and say it should be 18. I think that with some exceptions, abuse and parents stealing money and stuff, I think, a lot of people graduate at 17, and there's just this weird, depending when your birthday is, sometimes 3 months, sometimes almost a whole year before you turn 18 and treat it like an adult by the system, but you still have to operate like an adult. You still have to work, you still maybe go to college. A lot of people have moved out. My birthday is in October, and so I was 18 when I graduated high school, and it worked out fine. But plenty of my friends were 17 until the summer, or sometimes our youngest classmates until August and September. So that's my answer for that. And I think means testing programs don't make a whole lot of sense on their face. Just because your parents have money doesn't mean your kids have money. That's your parents' money, it's not your money. And a lot of parents, trickles down. Like, if they have a nice house, you also live in a nice house. Makes sense. But a lot of parents, when you turn 18, they kick you out, or you graduate high school, they kick you out, and you're on your own. Or maybe they just think that, you're 18 and you're good, but they're not paying your bills. So I don't know. We need to still give kids some benefits. And maybe you look at it and you're like, I like this idea, but maybe the amount should be lower for the parents that have $250,000 or more. And I'm okay with that. I wouldn't make it too much lower, like maybe half payment. That's fine. Um, it's not a whole lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but it would drastically reduce childhood poverty and give kids some opportunities. I think we should also set up a universal child care program to give parents free or subsidized options, and that just fills in the gap. You have the money to help you pay for child care and parenting expenses from birth, and then you have you can pay for daycare, and then you have universal pre-K, and you go to school with teachers that are paid well and hopefully happy and less stressed out, with buses that get there on time. And then you go to college, which is free, and then you might even go to grad school because you've always wanted to be a doctor, and you can actually live out your dream because you did your part. You went to school, you studied, you're good at math, you're good at science, um, and the state did its part. They've made sure these institutions, these public universities, are still there and fully funded, and they've made it so it's free. You go there, you might have to pay for food, might have to pay for housing, which has been subsidized, and food, which you can afford. Hopefully local. Maybe you can even grow some yourself, and you can be a doctor, and you can go and talk to your patients, um, and it's all good. There's you talk to your patients, and now bring it to the next part. You have Medicare for all, and there's universal health care, and so you might have more patients than your parents did, but these patients are healthier. They're coming in sooner before there's a chronic illness. Um, they're coming in when they have pre-hypertension instead of hypertension, and pre-diabetic instead of diabetic. Um, I would do Medicare for all, but I also don't think we should just count out all the other universal options because Medicare for all is just one type of universal system, and there's a few more that we can look at our peers um, and model off of. I don't think we should count out a national hospital system, especially because we already have a national hospital system, but just for veterans and their families, and it works pretty well. Like veterans will complain about the VA, and their complaints are valid. I'm not dismissing those, but most of their complaints aren't necessarily about the service. It's about getting approval to actually get the treatment or the care. But the actual care seems to be world quality, and they try pretty innovative things. They have pretty pretty good success rates. So it shows that it works, and you have one place you can just go to and get all your care. If you go to Kaiser Healthcare, you get something similar, but you have to pay for. But you just go, and you go to level 3, I think it is, and that's where the vision is. You can go to the bottom 4, and that's where the rapid services are. You get testing and stuff, and it's good. But Medicare for All seems to be what we have the most support for, easiest to enact. And also, I think you don't have to pick one or the other. We can have both. And have all preventative services free at point of service. Also include therapy and psychiatric services, and free vision and hearing screenings with free glasses and hearing aids. We probably have to limit how many you get a year before you have to pay, but one free pair of glasses is better than zero free pairs of glasses. And we should also have dental services. We shouldn't be like England and cover everything, but then pretend that teeth are not part of everybody, because that's silly. And a lot of times, poor dental hygiene leads to other issues like heart disease and such. And sometimes the dentist or the eye doctor or ear doctor can catch other issues that are seemingly unrelated. And also speech therapy, language services, including teaching sign languages, Braille. We already have pretty good services, but most of them come from like nonprofits or different organizations, so it kind of depends where you live. That would teach things like this. But yeah, it's just depending on where you live, and we should just subsidize those programs, and possibly the government should be the ones doing it, not nonprofits. And just make it so that everyone can communicate, and everyone can communicate. And also, gender affirming care should be covered. I don't think that's the biggest deal in the world, But we just had one election where we've been told that we have to throw trans people under the bus in order to win elections, and I think that's silly. Um, so yes, gender affirming care covered, which also includes, if you want a breast reduction, um, to reduce back pain and things of that nature, that also counts. Um, Almost done. I think we should subsidize birth control. Babies are expensive, and preventing them is fairly cheap. In previous videos, I talked about how I think that we fight a little bit too much about abortion. I think the left has already won this fight. We've already, people need abortions, and the right rolled back reproductive health care rights nationwide. And in some states, there's just no abortion clinics, and we've seen like horrible things happen. And I think eventually they're gonna have to move those back. But this is a great time to point out that there's ways to prevent getting pregnant other than just abstinence. But those ways aren't free, and to some people it might be like, whatever, how much do condoms even cost? But it depends what you're getting. But they can be anywhere between $8 for a box of 12 to $16 for a box of 12, depending what store you're at, depending what time of year it is, if there's markups and stuff, and you know, um, and depending how active you are, that might last a year or a week, and it just depends. And that's a lot of people's main form of contraception. I believe vasectomies and tubals should be free, as well as birth control pills, condoms, spermicide. Um, Dental dams don't actually prevent pregnancies, but throw those in as well. Things to reduce the spread of STIs and pregnancy, I think, should be free and or subsidized and easily accessible, and better options. Because when I was growing up, in high school and high school and college, you could go and get free condoms from the health department. I believe you still can, but they were too small. They were one brand and it just didn't fit. So that's not helping, at least some of us. So yes, I think it's a public health benefit. It reduces the spread of STIs and pregnancy, and also reduces the incidences of abortion. We should also make STI and COVID testing free. I think we should make we should put a lot of money into tracking and preventing pandemics and viruses in particular. But COVID is still around, and we stopped subsidizing COVID tests. But they're, to my understanding, not the most expensive things to manufacture or test. And so it seems like it was just a choice to not test anymore because we're tired of talking about it, and that doesn't seem good, especially if it mutates and comes back stronger. Same with STI testing. It's free some places, and it's like sometimes it just depends on your income, sometimes it depends on your location, and sometimes it's like $300 for a panel test. And if you're being responsible and getting it like twice a year, or sometimes you're asked to get tested before you have a new partner, and that could be every month, every 3 months, every 4 months. Every $300 is pricey. It's a big barrier, even if you make a good salary. And actual tests don't actually cost that much. You might see sometimes there might be a truck that goes around, or a van that goes around to like do free rapid HIV and AIDS testing. And those are free, and the public has a vested interest of knowing results and limiting the spread, not just in this country but other countries. So we should also restore the funding to combat AIDS and HIV and other STIs in other countries. We should also put more money into not only prevention but treatment, cures. I hesitate to say, but some ways to treat the effects and or the actual infection. And also just some, um, sorry, making sure I didn't miss anything. Also, just putting some more money into just education. I talk to people sometimes, and they still repeat some of like the abstinence-only education stuff, where they think that everyone that slept with more than one person is just like walking around with like HIV, and that's just not the case. Actually, if you have safe sex practices, it's pretty easy to get laid and also not get sick, because that's all a STI is. It's a cold, just in a different part of your body, or sometimes the same part of your body. Sometimes the same symptoms as the flu, but obviously some of them can have long-term effects, including death for AIDS, um, and infertility if left untreated. But again, so can other non-communicable, non-sexually transmitted diseases. So there's a little bit stigma around them, just about how you get them. So wrapping up, I think we should ban ghost job postings and fine companies for having fake jobs on there. And we should also fine companies for not having queer set amounts for salary. A range shouldn't be able to exceed $5,000, for example. You can't have a job that you're saying is anywhere between $50,000 and $80,000. That's not enough. That doesn't tell anybody anything. You should also be automatically enrolled in unemployment benefits, and we should find companies that are not. We should find them monthly if they're not participating in unemployment insurance systems. There's some big nonprofits and some other organizations that have opted out of it. In DC, there's a lot of labor laws that don't actually apply in the district because they are technically not a state. And elsewhere, there's some places that have just opted not to do it. If you don't have enough staff, then you also are exempt sometimes. But I think when you're dismissed, you should automatically be enrolled in an unemployment system, and the state has plenty of resources to try to push you back to the workforce. But the state isn't doing their job of making sure that we have a steady workforce, and so they should do better at that. And I think, yeah, I think we should also end right to work laws, but I'm not going to go into that too much. The last thing I put is that we should just adopt proven policies. We shouldn't have to wait till somebody wants to make a 2-hour video convincing people to do things that we've already agreed to do. If it works in New York City, it will probably work in Tampa Bay. If it works in Tampa Bay, it'll probably work in DC. And when I say work, it means like, if something's reduced homelessness and haven't just shifted it to a different place, we should probably enact it nationwide. If we've seen something drastically lower the incidence of child cancer, we should just go ahead and do that nationwide. Like the whole point of the states being laboratories is we're supposed to take the best examples and uplift them and just do that. So we have the former FTC Commissioner Lena Khan working with Zohran Mamdani in New York City to push on things like a ban on bank overdraft fees, which she did in the Biden administration, but we didn't encode into law. We just had a rule change, or anti-monopoly protections, an easy way to cancel subscriptions, all things she did in the Biden administration and were rolled back under Trump. We should just take those and put them in law as soon as we win the House and hopefully the Senate. And then if Trump doesn't sign it into law, we just publicly shame him until he does. And some of the stuff I don't think he actually reads or cares about, and I think some of this stuff that he would just sign if it passes. We should also include funding and new enforcement mechanisms to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I think we should also give more teeth to the Department of Labor, but the CFPB seems to be the organization that has our best interests in mind for the everyday person, and it doesn't have enough power, people, money, which make it a fully fleshed out department with real enforcement power, and divorce its money from the normal budgetary processes so that the Republicans can't try to kill it every time they're in charge. we should also try to do what we can to make sure that the Republican Party isn't really a factor. They tried to overthrow the country, and I don't know why we keep propping them up. There's plenty of other parties that should come in. Having two, at least nominally left-wing policies, or four, makes more sense than propping up the Republican Party. So that's what I would do. I would push for each and every one of these things and more. And if you think of it as a fully fleshed out vision, I think the government should make sure that people aren't starving in the streets and they can actually have an opportunity. Also, it's the American dream. I think we should believe in the American dream and make it real. Thank you.